Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at drawing a portrait from a photograph. I'll walk you through the key steps, including getting the proportions right, sketching the features accurately, and building the 3D form of the face. The main goal is to help you to understand how to start a portrait and then how to move from one step to the next to get the best result. If you want to give this a go, you'll just need an HB pencil, an eraser, and if you want, some darker pencils for later. The very first step is to find the central axis of the face. In this tutorial, I'm using a photograph of a person who is looking straight ahead, and that's what I'd recommend. The head is facing the front, it's not tilting up or down, and it isn't tilted to one side. And this means the axes of the face, that's the height of the face and the width of the face, is going to form a straight cross. We're looking for the line down the center of the face and the line across the eyes. Put the vertical line down first and mark where you want the top of the head and the bottom of the head to be. And then the line across the eyes is halfway down that vertical center line. You can try that on your own face using your hand to measure from the top of your skull to your eyes, and then compare that to the distance from your eyes to your chin. And see if your eyes are actually in the middle of your head. We've decided the height of the head. Now we need to figure out how wide the face should be across the eyes. The width of the face really depends on the person, but usually it's about 3/4 of the height. And you can see me measuring this here on screen. And then working to get that same relationship in my drawing, where the width of the face is 3/4 the height of the face. The next step in drawing a portrait is to find the placement of the features of the face. Where do the eyes, the nose, and the mouth go? And this is a really important step because it sets up the correct proportions. To do this, we're going to use something called the thirds of the face. But first, before we put in the thirds of the face, we need to figure out where the eyebrows go, and you'll see why soon. So I'm going to put an indication of the eyes. Usually there are 3 eye lengths across the center of the face, and maybe half an eye on either side of the face. So in other words, we want this center space between the 2 eyes to be exactly the same length as each eye. And it might take a little bit of fiddling around to get those spaces correct. Draw in a general eye shape for now. We're going to make it more detailed later. But once we put these in, now we can put a line across the top where we think the eyebrows are going to go. And if you look at the photograph, you'll see that the eyebrows are maybe the height of one eye above the eyes. The reason we need to put the eyebrow line in first is because then we can find the placement of the nose. The placement of the nose is usually halfway between the eyebrows and the chin. If you look at this photograph and watch me measure it with that green line, you can see that this is true in this case. The nose is halfway between the eyebrows and the chin. What we've done here is we've created 2 equal spaces, and these form 2 of the 3/3 of the face. The next third of the face that we can add is the space between the eyebrows and the hairline. Not the top of the head, but just where the hair meets the top of the forehead. That space is usually the same as those other 2 spaces that we've already created. We always want to check these because sometimes they vary from person to person. And I can see when I move this green line up the face, the one at the top is a little bit shorter than those other thirds. So I need to make sure that that's the same in my drawing. And all of these things are going to add up later to get the correct likeness of the person. Once we've found those 3 main thirds of the face, we can look for another set of thirds, and this is between the bottom of the nose and the chin. These thirds define where the center line of the lip is going to go, and also that little dimple underneath the bottom lip. These 3 thirds are not usually even. As you can see, the space of the chin is the biggest space, then the space where the lower lip sits is the smaller space. So we can put them in order of size. Now that we know where the mouth is going to go, we can put in a line there to indicate how wide it will be, and then do a few alignment checks, like the corners of the mouth should line up on a vertical line with the center of the eye. But in this one, the corners of the mouth do line up just inside the pupils. The sides of the nose should line up with the inner corner of the eye. These guides are not always exact, but we can use them to get an idea of how things line up in the portrait we're drawing. So we've got the placement of the features now. and we've got the proportions of the face. The next step is to sketch in the features and the shape of the face more accurately. As much as possible, when we do this, we want to use angles. So as I go around the side of the face here, instead of drawing just sort of a gentle curve, I'm looking for strong angles that I can see. And I'm ignoring curves for now, because angles are what create the unique likeness of that particular face. We can soften any corners out later, but if you focus on drawing curves, you'll probably end up with a curve that is too exaggerated. Angles are measurable, we can see them more clearly, and that's why they're really useful. Now that I've drawn in all the key angles using straight lines, you can see me softening off the corners a little bit, but still keeping those angles. As we go through the drawing, it's important to keep checking it, keep analyzing what you've already got down. One thing we can do just to double check your proportions is to draw a triangle that joins the outer corner of the eyes with the outer corner of the nose, just to see if we've got the similar triangle to the photograph. Another thing we can check is where the points of the jaw line up with the mouth. And you can see with this portrait that those corners of the jaw are not symmetrical. One is slightly higher than the other. Now we're coming to sketching the features of the face, but let's put in the shape of the hair. Again, trying to use angles when you do this. You could put in the neck and also think about how the neck lines up with other parts of the face. I like to use the outer corner of the eye to see what kind of angle the neck is at. Let's put in the ears. Run a line from the bottom of each ear to see how they align with the mouth, in this case the top lip. And do the same with the top of the ears to see how they align with the eyes. Look for angles when you put in those ears. We should be able to draw these ears with just 3 angles. And that way you're not going to end up with something that is cartoonish or exaggerated curves. All these things we've put in so far are just placeholders and guides, so that we know where to put our detailed sketching over the top. Once we have all those placeholders, then we can look more closely at the shapes of the features of the face. Take a look at these eyes. Erase any lines that you don't need, and then really study the shape of those eyes. I like to use 3 angles for the top eyelid and 2 angles for the bottom eyelid. This helps you find the likeness of that particular eye. And this is where you have to start looking really closely at your photograph. We're trying to add in the exact angles that we can see, rather than drawing something that is a generic eye shape. You can add in the iris for each eye, and notice how the circle of the iris sits slightly underneath the bottom eyelid and the top eyelid. Looking at the triangle shapes of the whites of the eye on either side of the iris can help to see the correct size that the iris should be. Then put in the angles for the fold of the top eyelid. Rather than just drawing a curved shape, look for the angles at the start and end of the curve and draw those as straight lines. Remember to make sure there is 1 eye space between the eyes, and you can double check now that you still have that space there. Mark in the pupil and that highlight that overlaps the pupil slightly. Shade around that highlight, leaving it to the white of the page. You can shade in the pupil and the iris. Find your eyebrow line and put in the shapes of the eyebrows. You might think of the eyebrow as a curve, but can you see the difference between each eyebrow and how they have some straight areas in them? On the left, the eyebrow has 3 angles, and the right eyebrow has 2 main angles. When we draw the nose, we can treat it as 3 ellipses. Imagine a circle for the tip of the nose and 2 leaning ellipses for the wings of the nose. This then forms spaces for the nostrils. Find the angles for the sides of the nose and very lightly mark the angle up along the bridge of the nose. This area is usually created just by shading the shadow on the side of the nose, so we don't want a strong edge there. Moving on to putting in the mouth, look for the angles of the center line of the mouth. Generally, there are 6 angles to that center line of the mouth. Sometimes you can see them all and sometimes you can't. For this mouth, I can see 5 main angles. Notice how the angle at each corner of the mouth is slightly different. These angles are key to creating the expression. We can add in the top lip using 4 angles and the bottom lip using 3 angles. Take a look at the chin. Can you see how it protrudes forward from the face in a sort of a circular shape? It's like we're trying to find the underlying structure of that chin. Now that we've sketched in all of the main features of the face, we can start to add in some light and shadow. This is where we can think about the 3D form of the face, looking for the underlying shapes. We've already done that for the chin, but we can also think about where the sides of the face angle back into space at the point of the cheekbones. And this often takes the form of a shadow. We can draw in that shape of shadow on the left side of the face to show the plane change, or where the side of the face goes back into space. Also notice the shadow on the left side of the nose. The light is coming from the right side, so there's a shadow on the left side of the nose, a shadow on the left of the cheekbone or the left side of the face, and a shadow on the left side of the neck. I've drawn all these shadows in with strong angles. Angles give structure to the face. Parts of the face are soft and curved. The truth is, curves are unreliable. Angles are something we can measure and trust. So they form the structure for everything else. Even on the light side of the face, look for mid-value shapes. We can draw them in very lightly and then shade them lightly to help create depth. Now that I've clearly identified where the shadows are going to go, I can go through and shade them all in. And at this point, we're just dividing the face up into two values, light and dark, or light and shadow. So I'm not worrying about how dark I need to go. I'm just blocking in all of the shadow areas that I've identified. This might feel a little bit strange because we're blocking in shapes rather than smoothing out the skin, but it's very important for the three-dimensional form. We can soften or blend the shading later. I'm keeping this drawing sketchy and loose, but even if it's not a perfectly smooth, finished drawing, you can still create a really strong sense of form. When you're shading in the lips, be aware that the lips are a darker color than the skin, so they're almost the same as shading a shadow value. But make sure you leave that highlight area on the bottom lip. I've used light pressure to shade in all of these shadow shapes, and now I can smooth them out with a tissue just to take away some of the harder marks of my shading. Can you see how breaking the face into light and dark like this has made a huge difference to what we had before? Without showing a light side and a dark side, the face looks flat. From this point, the process is all about refining what we already have. Go over everything with a careful eye, comparing your drawing to the photograph, and find some things that need to change. So I've looked at the photograph, and you can see me now making two small changes to this drawing. One is how the points of the chin align on a vertical line with the rest of the face. The other small change I'm going to make is the angle of this lower eyelid on the left-hand side. It's not quite right, so I'm going to adjust it. From here, I would work my way around the entire drawing, looking at all the different elements and comparing each element to the photograph, trying to find small changes that I can make. And every change that you make should bring your drawing a little bit closer to the likeness of the photograph. Unfortunately, it's a long, slow process, and it's the only way to get a good likeness to the photograph and also to get better at observing photographs or your subject. When you're observing the photograph, you're looking for angles, you're looking for shapes, and that might include negative spaces like this dark area of hair next to the jaw. When you're drawing the hair, look for large dark shapes and shade them in loosely rather than trying to draw individual strands of hair. We can go ahead and darken up some of the other values within the face once we're happy with the shapes that we've got. Also pay attention to edges and lines. If we look at the center line of the mouth, it shouldn't be a hard line. It should change in thickness and darkness across its length. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's dark, and sometimes it's light. When it comes to refining the shading, we can add a greater number of light values in the light side and a greater number of dark values in the shadow side. You can see me refining my shading, refining the contrast and the values. Portrait drawing is always a process of editing and adjusting what you already have down on the paper. I'm starting to get a fairly close likeness now, I think. Don't worry if you're finding getting a likeness with your portraits difficult. It does take a lot of practice to be able to see those subtle changes that you need to make. What you can work on right now to get better at portrait drawing is those first two steps. Practice finding the central axis of the face, and practice placing the features of the face using the thirds of the face method. If you can get a result that looks natural because the proportions are right, even if it doesn't look exactly like the person you're trying to draw, you are well on the right path to success. The more portraits you do, the better you're going to get at those observation skills and finding those very small changes that you need to make to get it closer to the likeness. I hope this video has helped you with your portrait drawing in some small way. If you're feeling inspired, why not go find a photograph and have a go at those first two steps?